All right, so for 4.4 and 4.5, we're going to put them together, and we are going to do triangle congruence all in one. So there are 5 different ways to prove triangles are congruent. We talked in 4.3 about the 6 things that need to be true for triangles to be congruent. Right? We need all 3 sides, and we need all 3 angles congruent, and if that's the case, then we know triangles are congruent. But that was kind of a lie, because that is true that we need all 6 things, or if triangles are congruent, that all 6 things are congruent, but we don't need them all to know that the other ones are also congruent. In fact, for the most part, we only need 3 of those 6 things, and if we know 3 of those 6 things, then we know triangles are congruent automatically, that there's no way that they can't be congruent. So let's take a look at those 5 ways that we do know triangles are congruent without having to prove all 6 things. So the first one is side, side, side. And for our definition, I'll go ahead and write it in there. All right, so for our triangle congruence statement for this one, if all 3 pairs of sides are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So if we know, for example here, AB is congruent to segment DE, and we know segment BC is congruent to segment EF, and then we know segment CA is congruent to segment FD, then we know that the triangles are congruent. We don't even have to do anything with the angles, because those sides can only be put together in a way that form congruent triangles. So this is a nice shortcut so that we don't have to prove all 3 are congruent, but instead we can just prove, we don't need to prove all 6 are congruent. Instead we can just prove that 3 of the 6 things are congruent. So our next one is side, angle, side. All right, so if 2 pairs of sides are congruent, so for example we have side AB congruent to side DE, and we also have segment AC congruent to segment DF. So if those 2 pairs of sides are congruent, and the angle that's in between them, so in this case it's angle A and angle D, then we know that the triangles are congruent. Okay, so super important here that it's the 2 sides and the angle in between them. And one little help with that is that we also have our 2 sides, and then the letter A is in between them. So side, angle, side. All right, next one. All right, so if 2 pairs of angles are congruent and the side in between them is also congruent, then the angles are congruent. So once again, if we have 2 pairs of angles here, so there's one pair, angle D and angle A, and the other pair being angle C and angle F are congruent, and the side that's in between them, so AC and DF, then we know that those 2 triangles are also congruent. That's enough information to know that those 2 triangles are congruent. And another one here. All right, so this one is saying if 2 pairs of angles are congruent, so once again we have angle A congruent to angle D, angle B is congruent to angle E, and we have a side, this side here, that's not in between those angles. So this one's a little bit different than ASA in terms of it's not in between. Then we know that the triangles are congruent. So this also works. So notice we know it's ASA if the side in between the 2 angles is congruent. So for example here AC and DF, but we know it's going to be angle, angle, side if the side that is congruent is not in between them. In fact, it only touches one of the angles. So you can see that this side here is made up of D and F, so it's segment DF, but F isn't part of the 2 angles that are congruent, so it's only a part of the angle D that is congruent, not the angle E. And once again, notice the side here only touches one angle, so the S is only going to touch one of the A's. Where here the S is in between the 2 A's, and the side is in between the 2 angles. So all 3 of those are pretty similar. They're just a little bit different, and they're just tweaking. It will take some use to getting used to this and actually using it and applying it before you can really wrap your whole brain around it. And the last one, RHL, is by far the most different of them all. So here, let me write this one up. Okay, so this one states, if the hypotenuse and one leg pairs of right triangles are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So, first of all, we need to know it's a right triangle. So that's the first thing we need to know. That's the R. And then if we know that, then we need to know the hypotenuses are congruent, which, remember, hypotenuse is always the side across from the right angle. So in this case, it'll be XZ, and we know that's congruent to this other hypotenuse over here, PR. And then we know at least one of the legs are also congruent. So, for example, we have PQ congruent to XY. That's one of the legs. The other leg that could have been congruent here is QR congruent to YZ, but we only need one of them. So if we have that, then we know that the triangles are congruent. So looking back at all of this, that's a lot of information. Like I said, it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to it. And it's almost like any type of three things is going to work, but that's not always the case. And you want to make sure that you're not making any assumptions here, which it's super, super, super easy to make an assumption. So we get to my favorite sentence that I get to say in geometry, and unfortunately I'm not here with you to say it if you're watching this video, but here it goes. So there is no ass in geometry. There is no angle side, side, side in geometry that you're ever going to use. And if something is set up as an angle side, side, then you know that you don't have enough information to actually solve it. If you look, right, there's no ASS, 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 ASS. There's not any of these that are going to be ASS. In fact, this one actually kind of is, right? We have our angle, and then we have a side and another side. So it's only going to work if specifically that angle is a right angle. And then we have RHL to help us out there. All right, so at this point, we're going to take a break from our note packet, and we're going to move into our triangle congruence packet and worksheet. So go ahead and take a look at the first ones there, and the next video we'll have where we're starting out with that.